quickly. The stroke had come like a thief in the night, and it robbed Carolyn of nearly every ability she had, except the ability to cry. And she did that more than ever before. Losing heart, losing hope. I wonder, would you be able to talk about hope after a string of unthinkable calamities? Have you accentuated the positive and eliminated the negative during the low points of your life? We know the words. We know the words are true, that there's always hope, but sometimes it's hard to believe them. And certainly all of us suffer through bouts of discouragement. Let me ask you, raise your hand if you have never been discouraged. Certainly we all have. You know, the dictionary defines discourage as to deprive of courage, to deter, to dishearten, to hinder. All those D words, discourage, deprive, deter. And you can throw in doom and depression and defeat and maybe even despair as well. The mind dwells on them when life sort of has us pinned down, and our emotions, like the responders they are, follow suit. Folks, the New Testament uses 3 Greek words to carry the idea of being disheartened or dispirited or discouraged. They're usually translated as to faint or to grow weary. For example, the Apostle Paul warns us to take special care not to become the source of discouragement for our children. Colossians 3:21 says, "Fathers, do not embitter your children, or they will become discouraged. They will grow weary." 2 Corinthians chapter 4 and verse 16 teaches us all. It says, "Therefore do not lose heart," meaning do not grow faint, do not grow weary. Though outwardly we are wasting away, and inwardly we are being renewed day by day. And Jesus brings up the subject of discouragement in the context of prayer. Luke 18:1 says this. It says, "Then Jesus told his disciples a parable to show them that they should always pray and not give up, to not grow faint, to not grow weary." And the parable Jesus told was that of the persistent widow. Remember, she kept coming to the judge day after day till she got what she wanted? My friends, there's so much truth in that verse about prayer. We must live and breathe and take up residence in prayer, or we're sure to faint, to grow weary, to lose heart. Certainly discouragement will come. And when it does, it takes diligent faith to live above it. And if you think that discouragement is purely a personal issue, remember that entire nations can run out of hope. It happened during the darkest days of Israel and Judah when the invaders roll in. The Babylonians destroyed the holy city of Jerusalem, looting it, carrying away its people to enslavement in a distant land. It seemed that God's chosen people had lost it all. Their land, their pride, their identity as a nation, that special thing that God called them to be. These were the darkest times, days of lamentation, days of weeping, days of silence. But when a ruler named Cyrus the Persian came to power, he gave permission to the Jewish exiles to begin the homeward journey. In the time of this return and the rebuilding of the temple, 2 biblical heroes stepped up. A priest named Ezra and an administrator named Nehemiah. Today I'd like to focus on Nehemiah, for he was the rebuilder of broken dreams. Friends, the 4th chapter of Nehemiah's book puts us in the middle of some pretty exciting times. Nehemiah, the gifted organizer, has arrived in a chaotic situation, but he's galvanized the community and jump-started the rebuilding operation of the walls that surrounded the city. Because with the walls of the city in ruins, the people of Israel haven't had the luxury of peaceful sleep. Think of it like the whole front wall of your house is gone. Gonna sleep well? Probably not. Raiders from outlying provinces had been able to attack by night and to keep the Israelite settlers discouraged and fearful. It was done very deliberately. The threat of the Hebrews' revival, it was unwelcome to the neighbors, and talk of rebuilding the wall had to be snuffed out. Therefore, the Israelites had been under constant attack from every side. Nehemiah 4:8 tells us the neighbors formed kind of a dark alliance to bring pressure on the construction workers. Now imagine that. Imagine the front wall of your house is gone, and you need to rebuild it to protect yourself. And the rest of the neighborhood gathers together and says, every time they go to do something, we're going to sneak in and we're going to attack them. But we're not just going to hurt them. We're going to kill them. Wow. The greatest weapon in our arsenal were fear and discouragement. But God has different ideas. He's empowered his visionary servant Nehemiah in a mighty way, and day by day the work goes on. Brick by brick the walls are rising again. As we jump into this scripture here in the 4th chapter of Nehemiah, the work is halfway complete. The people can smell victory. Anybody been ever that close to victory that you can smell it? I've had baseball teams that were up by 6 runs in the 9th inning. You knew you were going to win. Right. And yet wisdom and experience tells us that it's at the midpoint where there's a precarious place to be. A bit less than half, a bit more than half isn't so bad, but it's dangerous to be exactly in the middle. The Bible tells us right in between, at the halfway point, a fresh wave of discouragement breaks out through rumors of marauders and mayhem. Just when you're halfway done, that's when that group of people outside says, you know what? We're really going to get you now. We're coming, and we're coming fast and strong. And Nehemiah realizes that he must deal with the lagging spirits of his people. I think you and I will recognize that the principles he used haven't changed. Nehemiah had to deal with discouragement in the same ways that we do. And as we review these principles, you're likely to say, yeah, I've been there. I've done that. So let's discover how Nehemiah handled the problem. And as we do, we see that the first thing he did was recognize discouragement. Yeah, he saw exactly what was going on. I wonder, do we do that? Do we recognize when discouragement is going on in our lives? How about our neighbors? How about our friends? There are 4 factors we find in discouragement. The first factor is fatigue. Anybody remember Vince Lombardi's favorite quote about fatigue? Tom, you may know it. Fatigue makes cowards of us all. What Vince Lombardi was saying is when you get tired, you're not as aggressive, you're not as courageous. The wall builders found that to be true also. If we look at Nehemiah 4:10, the first part says, meanwhile the people of Judah said, the strength of the laborers is giving out. The construction project required about 60 days of backbreaking labor, and halfway finished, the workers had been going at it for a month. Fatigue was catching up with them, and when energy runs short, so does courage. Haven't you found this to be true? When you're working 12-hour days to finish that annual report, when you're working on weekends, when you're working 7 days a week, or you're cleaning the house all day, then helping the kids with algebra all night. For a while you kind of rock along and you do what you feel you need to, but sooner or later your personal limits will catch up with you. Every human body is governed by its own mathematical formula involving time and pressure and exertion. And if you exceed the limits of that equation, then the cracks start to appear. Anybody ever get discouraged just because they were tired? You begin to become tense and irritable and gloomy. These are the times that your enemy, the devil, circles your name on the agenda. As I've become older, I hope I've grown wiser. And one little bit of wisdom I've grasped is that I can no longer push myself as hard as I used to. Most of my life, 4 hours of sleep was enough. It's not anymore. And if I push too hard for too long, I'm going to see diminishing returns on my investment of my time and my talents. And then comes the deluge of discouragement. And when discouraged, that's when I become irritable and cranky. That's what certainly happened in Jerusalem. The people were weary and they were discouraged. One thing after another, discouragement set in. And they were not only discouraged, but something else they were was frustrated. That's the second factor in discouragement, frustration. Look at the second part of verse 10. It says, "And there is so much rubble that we cannot rebuild the wall." Anybody ever worked for days and weeks on the mundane details of things and stepped back and wondered if your efforts had any significance at all? Tired as they were, the Israelites no longer saw the proud, gleaming walls of their dreams. Visions of rebuilding the walls seemed like a mirage in the desert. There was nothing but broken bricks and mud and debris. The 10th verse records that they were suddenly frustrated with the ever-present rubbish and rubble of heavy construction. The old walls had been torched. There were great piles of worthless debris everywhere. And the frustration of those endless mountains of rubble was weighing heavy on Nehemiah's people. Imagine this, they would nearly collapse in weariness as the sun set down. And then they would arrive at the construction site the next morning, and it sort of appeared as if nothing had happened. It seemed as if the debris had a life of its own, and it was multiplying. In short, they were burned out. Now, I got to tell you, there are a couple ways to live your life. You can live out, you can wear out, or you can burn out. I'm certainly hoping to live out. And I'm sure you'll agree that that's the best alternative. But please understand the true nature of burnout is not working too hard. It's working too hard on the wrong thing. Burnout is pulling the whole weight uphill all by yourself. It's reaching the summit and realizing you're not only going to reach the summit, but you're probably going to topple to the bottom and have to start all over again. It's a feeling of despondency, and Nehemiah's workers were suffering from rubbish burnout. Anybody ever suffer from rubbish burnout? I remodeled some houses in my time. I have suffered from rubbish burnout. They couldn't see the picture of the shining city. All they saw was debris. What do they say about obstacles? It's what we see when we take our eyes off our goal. Anybody ever see how construction companies put a sign up in front of the big mud-filled hole in the ground that shows what that nice, beautiful building is going to look like in a few years or a few months? There was none of that here. And the people were frustrated. Third factor in discouragement is failure. Nehemiah 4:10 tells us so much. It says, "Meanwhile, the people of Judah said, 'The strength of the laborers is giving out.' That's fatigue. And there is so much rubble. That's frustration. That we cannot rebuild the wall. That's failure." The Israelites threw their hands up here and pronounced their failure. Yeah, fatigue and frustration are a good recipe for failure. We're tired, they say. We're fed up. We can't do this. It was a great idea, but we've been at it for a month. We just can't take it anymore. Folks, negative talk is infectious. It spreads like a virus to infect the community. Think about we're talking about everybody with the flu. I wonder if negative thoughts spread just that same way. Nehemiah's people hadn't failed at all. They had not failed, but it appeared that way to them. Let me tell you that failure is one of life's giants, and it's a force for discouragement. And failure is universal. Every human being that has ever lived, with one exception, 2,000 years ago, has succumbed to failure. What makes the difference is how we handle our failure. I had a quote in my gym when I was growing up. It simply said that failure is not getting knocked down. Failure is not getting back up. Because we all get knocked down. But we all need to get back up. The great danger is letting our negative thoughts and impressions be compounded by the problem we suffer. When things go wrong, we're more willing to give an ear to the enemy, the world's greatest demotivational speaker, and we slowly but surely begin to buy into his lies and his distortions. Wow, I'm 60 years old and I haven't accomplished anything. Man, that project at work, that just didn't work out so well. You know what? I'm a failure. Baloney. That's a lie. That's a lie that Satan wants us to desperately believe. Fatigue and frustration and failure are all factors in discouragement. The fourth is fear. Nehemiah chapter 4 and verses 11 and 12 says this. Also our enemies said, before they know it or see us, we will be right there among them, and we will kill them and put an end to the work. Then the Jews who lived near them came and told us 10 times over, wherever you turn, they will attack us. 10 times! Hey, as soon as I see you building on that wall, that night I'm going to sneak in, I'm going to attack you. Because guess what? The front of your house is still open. Not once, not twice. Scripture says 10 times. 10 times over. 10 times over. Fear is always part of discouragement. Imagine the weary workers that are building the walls in the midst of this ugly rubble. The job is grueling enough, but there's also the matter of these neighbors stopping by to put a word in their ear. These visitors are saying, guess what? We got a few surprises in store for you. You won't know when, you won't know how. But just when you least expect it, we're going to slip in and we're not going to hurt you, we're going to kill you. We'll take you out by increments, one by one, until the walls stand half built and there's nobody left to complete the task. Ever been that discouraged? Friends, nothing derails the work of God's people like a negative word. Everyone who tries to serve the Lord knows the truth of this. Everyone who serves the Lord will have someone be critical of them. Anybody ever had people be critical of you because of your faith? Everybody's nodding their heads. But it's amazing how the enemy always knows just when to put one of those criticisms on us. And sometimes we're tempted to quit. Yeah, criticism can become toxic. Perhaps you're coping with it right now. Perhaps the bitter words of others, the stinging words of others are eroding your spirit. Maybe it's in the workplace. Maybe it's in your home. Maybe it's by the people who are closest to you. Perhaps there are people who play on your fears until you become very discouraged. Yeah. 4 factors are involved in our discouragement. Please recognize them. 1 is fatigue, another is frustration, another is failure, and another is fear. Anybody know those adversaries? All of us? Respond to them. And how do we do that? How do we respond to discouragement? Well, we do 5 things that's found in Nehemiah. We'll cover 1 this week, and then we'll look at the 4 others next Sunday, Lord willing. And the first way we respond, I think, is to cry out to God. Look at Nehemiah chapter 4 and verses 4 and 5, and then verse 9. It says, "Hear us, O God, for we are despised. Turn their insults back on their own heads. Give them over as plunder in a land of captivity. Do not cover up their guilt or blot out their sins from your sight, for they have thrown insult in the face of the builders." Verse 9 says this, "But we prayed to our God, and we posted a guard at night to meet this threat." Friends, I'm going to make a very radical statement here. Next time you encounter some major setback in your life, reverse your usual procedure. That is, cry out to God first instead of last. Most of us wait till we've exhausted all other alternatives. We try and fix it ourselves because, it's my problem. I can fix that. Before appealing to God as a last resort. I don't know about you, but I just shake my head and grit my teeth when I hear someone say, "We have tried everything. Now all we can do is pray." What? All we can do is pray? Don't they know the power of prayer? Don't wait until the last moment to look up. When discouraged comes, start at the top. Go to the Lord and ask Him to help you sort through all the issues. Can I tell you something that works for me in times of discouragement? I learned this from a preacher that we had at this church before named Jim Ray. When I'm dealing with discouragement, I sit down with my computer and I write my thoughts to God. Paper and pen works good as well. That's how Jim did it. I say, "Lord, I need to talk to you right now. Some things are going on in my life that I can't understand, and I'm having a hard time with it. I need to tell you about it." For me, it helps to begin setting the issues down in writing, and as I verbalize my feelings to God, there's comfort. Something begins to change in my spirit. First of all, I bring everything out of the dark, out of that closet of anxiety, and I bring it into the light. Writing it down and reading it aloud brings clarity. And I discovered that things weren't quite the way I thought they were when they were smoldering within me before I wrote them down. I've imposed order on the issue. I've examined it in the light. And second, I learned to do what Nehemiah did. I have cried out to God. This is the most important thing. Sometimes we need to just let go, to be a child, to cry out to our daddy. It takes an innocence and a dependence that are the beginnings of wisdom. It cuts through our discouragement. If you don't think this is a very spiritual approach, read through the Psalms. When David was beset by worries, and he was beset by a multitude of them, he did exactly what I prescribed above. He wrote them down. He cried out. Didn't hide them. Didn't try to pack them away in a closet where we stick all of our fears. He cried out. He was brutally honest about his discouragement, and you know what? You and I can be too. First thing when discouraged, cry out to God. The second response to discouragement is to continue the work God has given you to do. We don't have enough time for the rest of this Sunday, so we'll talk about them next Sunday, Lord willing. Cry out. Continue the work God has given you to do. We'll talk more next Sunday. Let's pray.